extraordinary, and I hope it will be exactly that. I think oh, that's better. I had an echo. My name is Angelika Rauch of the University of Applied Sciences in Potsdam. And my co-host is Jörg Weber, and he's from the University of Applied Sciences in Potsdam too. And we will be hosting the session for today. We have slight technical difficulties, but I hope we'll manage. Before we proceed with our introduction, we would like to set up some basic rules of conduct for this and also for the last session. Please make sure your microphone and webcam are turned off, just to not disturb our presenters during their talk and save up some bandwidth. We encourage you to ask questions, and please do so in the chat box only. We will cherry pick some of the questions for the Q&A sessions, and our sessions will be recorded for archival reasons and for the possibility of opening it up towards a broader audience. And obviously, this will only happen when we receive consent from our speakers. And finally, this is a conference for and by students, so please respect one another for the exceptional and remarkable effort of making this event happen. And some of them will be presenting for a large audience for the first time, so please keep that in mind. So welcome again to this session of ConNext, where we will learn more about extraordinary materials, extraordinary techniques and objects. Just a short introduction how ConNext came into being and what we try to achieve. Now, this is a joint effort of the conservation training programs of the universities of Antwerp, Amsterdam, Hildesheim, Cologne, Potsdam, and Lincoln, all within the field of wood and furniture conservation, with some programs having also incorporated polychromy and modern materials. Hence the wide variety in subjects. And our ambition is to connect you, the students, with your international colleagues and give you the opportunity to share your work. And we are aware that these are strange times, especially for you, who have had such different expectations of what your time at the university would be like. But better days are hopefully ahead, and I'm sure there's a bright light at the end of the tunnel. But one of the very few advantages of our getting used to these virtual environments is that it has made sharing our knowledge on an international level even easier, and we are more connected than ever. And speaking of international level, we have over 320 registered participants, all united from over 30 different education and research institutes and from 12 different countries. That is beyond a great turnout. And education is paramount for the future of our field, and it starts with sharing stories. So sharing your hard work, experience, and knowledge is paramount. And we hope that you will continue doing so in the rest of your studies and your professional life. As the organizers of ConNext, we hope to kind of lower the threshold for you to send in an abstract for conferences like those of perhaps CICS, Ebert, or Future Talks. So let ConNext be the start of an international network for you. Because now we'll only meet each other virtually, but hopefully in the future we'll get a chance to have a drink together, and we really do hope that. So now we hope you are as excited as we are to kick off this fourth session with one of the many established keynote speakers that were so kind and eager to participate in this event. So let's ConNext.
Thank you, Angelika. Yes, I'm really proud to introduce our fourth keynote speaker, Tim Bechthold. Tim Bechthold is an acknowledged world expert in conservation of furniture and modern materials. He is head of conservation of the Neue Sammlung International Design Museum, Munich in Germany. He played as a cabinet maker in Bad Tölz, Germany from 1991 to 1993. The following 3 years, he studied conservation at the College Goering Institute in Munich, where he graduated in 1996 as a state-approved conservator for furniture and wooden sculptures. After having worked as a freelance furniture conservator, he proceeded to study at the chair of Restoration, Arts, Technology and Conservation Science at the Technical University Munich, focusing now on modern materials. At that time, he completed several conservation projects on the degradation of plastics, among others at the Museum of Applied Arts in Vienna and at the Vitra Design Museum in Weil am Rhein. In 2002, he graduated with a diploma thesis on polyurethane in 1960s furniture design. Since 2002, he has been the head of the conservation at die Neue Sammlung, the Design Museum, Munich. He set up the conservation department, which has become an important hub for the conservation and maintenance of modern design objects through research into the deterioration and preservation of the collections, the development of new conservation processes, and the knowledge of its original technology. Since 2009, Tim has initiated and organized the international conference series Future Talks, which focuses on the conservation of modern materials in design and art. He's the editor of the Future Talks postprints. Tim Bechthold has given numerous lectures on the conservation of plastics and teaches inter alia at the Technische Universität München, the University College London at Doha, Qatar, at the Akademie der Bildenden Künste in Stuttgart, and at the Academy der Bildenden Künste in Vienna. Tim, the floor is yours. The floor is yours. Sorry.
Thank you, Jörg, for this kind introduction. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you well.
And I think now you also can see me, I think, oh?
Yes,
okay.
We can.
Yep. Okay, and we now have the presentation. You see the presentation, yeah? Okay. Yeah, hello, everybody. Before I start, I would like to thank the organizers of this lecture series very much for the invitation, which I was very happy to accept because I'm convinced that we need these kind of platforms to learn from each other. What are the tasks of a museum conservator focusing on design objects? In my 19 years of work as chief conservator at die Neue Sammlung, the design museum, I've been confronted with a range of tasks which have successively changed and expanded, a fact I would like to discuss in more detail in the following. First, I will briefly introduce you to our collection and show you by way of example the essential challenges that the aging of modernism brings with it. On the basis of individual projects, I would like to illustrate the diversity of this subject area and finally show you how the areas of activity have changed in the course of the last 19 years. This with special consideration of the international conference series Future Talks, initiated and organized by our department. Die Neue Sammlung, the design museum, is the oldest design museum in the world. Born in 1907, out of the spirit of the Deutschen Werkbund, it was officially founded as a state museum in 1925. From the very beginning, it has been firmly committed to the modernism of its time and thus to contemporary design. To this day, this founding claim continues to shape the program of our museum. Since 2002, die Neue Sammlung has been housed in the Pinakothek der Moderne in Munich. When I took up my position as head conservator in 2002, I was initially involved with the object preparation and the installation of the permanent exhibition area, which covers around 4,000 square meters, and at the same time began to set up the conservation studios. With over 120,000 inventory numbers, die Neue Sammlung is one of the largest design collections in the world. The collection area includes product and industrial design, furniture and graphic design, but also mobility and IT design. Ceramics and glass form focal points, as do jewelry and utensils, as well as selected objects in the field of handcrafted design. In the field of product and industrial design, the Neue Sammlung is considered a leader. On this slide, you can see our newest exhibition area, the so-called X Depot, which houses more than 700 objects of our collection. Unfortunately, this space is still not open yet because of the pandemic. The large number of design objects in our collection perfectly reflects the technologies and materials of the 20th and 21st centuries. Here in particular, the use of plastics. But before we'll have a closer look at the challenges of such a collection, let us first define the characteristics of an industrial design object. Besides the formal statement of the designer, the object bears no individual hand. Usually, the object documents up-to-date materials and technology. The resulting objects are predominantly industrial produced and serial produced. The product results out of close cooperation of different stakeholders like designer, engineer, producer, and refers to social needs and trends. To conclude, one could say an industrial design object is a product of contemporary material and technology, creative design in interaction with its surrounding society. As mentioned above, quite a large amount of industrial design objects are made of different plastics. Unlike most traditional materials, some plastics are subject to dynamic aging processes and after only a short time often already bear irreversible traces of degradation. Corresponding type of damages can hardly be reconciled with the respective designer's original intention. This is when conservation comes into the game. Basically, when plastics fail, the possible causes can be related both to its manufacturing conditions and to the various impacts while in use. From the perspective of a conservator for design objects who is confronted to such damages, what are now the initial parameters for action? The intention of the designer is no longer readable, the material existence of the object is endangered, and the existence of surrounding objects is also endangered. But how do we approach a treatment? The comprehension of the object, its meaning, making, and its use is a starting point for further decision-making. Solid background knowledge can be achieved via literature research, source studies, material analysis, test series, and if available on contemporary material, and interdisciplinary discussions and cooperations with curators, designers, design historians, engineers, conservation scientists, producers, and specialist companies. Which treatment opportunities do we have? Depending on the condition of the object, the scope ranges from purely preventive measures to consolidating procedures to partial and full replacements to the complete replacement of the object. In order to better illustrate the challenges involved in the preservation of design objects, I would like to outline some of our plastic-relevant projects below as examples. Many have been realized in close cooperation with the relevant universities for conservation, including Munich, Stuttgart, Cologne, Amsterdam, Paris, Turin, Bern, Taiwan, and Qatar, to name but a few. The first I like to highlight was an active treatment. Flaking leads to consolidation, the Chair 1 project. Since 2012, our museum is in possession of the original model series of the famous Chair 1, designed by Konstantin Gricic in 2004. Originally, these models were meant to serve as temporary three-dimensional visualizations of the design process. By entering the design museum, their meaning has changed considerably. One of the main challenges in its conservation was the use of cheap industrial materials like, for example, sellotape, plasticine, cardboard, etc., which led to dramatic deterioration effects in a relatively short time, resulting in a serious decrease in stability. In the conservation of the cardboard models, we were confronted to flaking sellotape. Originally, the sellotape was fixing the single cardboard pieces to form the whole chair. Over time, the adhesive migrated into the cardboard carrier substrate, the tape got loose, and the chair collapsed. Adhesive tests were carried out to develop an appropriate consolidation treatment. Finally, the residues of the original adhesives were removed from the tape, and a film of thermoplastic beaver was applied. By means of a heating spatula, it was possible to re-adhere the sellotape again. To regain the structural stability of the cardboard model, areas of high tensile stress were backed with methylcellulose and a fine gossamer tissue. To understand the meaning and role of each chair model in the production process and to evaluate this for our conservation concept, the dialogue with the designer was of great and undeniable importance. Another active treatment, discoloration leads to retouching, the garden bench by Luigi Colani. The orange sun lounger was designed by Luigi Colani in 1967. A small-scale production was made of glass fiber reinforced polyester resin and manufactured by hand layup. It is most likely that the piece was exposed to environmental influences like weathering and some improper cleaning with harmful solvents. This led to partially micro-cracking and white discoloration. In this project, the focus laid on the development of a suitable reversible retouching technique without blurring traces of common use. By means of serial tests, the suitability of common conservation materials for airbrush was re-evaluated. We achieved remarkable results with the application of Horadam watercolors via airbrush technique. A film of the hydrocarbon resin Riga Res 1126 served both as a separation layer and as a final coat. The use of the airbrush technique enabled us to imitate the homogeneity of industrial coatings without denying acceptable traces of use. A slightly transparent color veil was achieved, reducing the intensity of the whitish discoloration in the stains. Scratches and surface irregularities stemming from production process and normal use remained visible. Then reconstructive treatment. Degradation leads to reconstruction, Tom Dixon's S-chair. The so-called S-chair, a prototype made of powder-coated, banded and welded steel tubes designed by Tom Dixon in 1987, showed heavy signs of deterioration already 20 years after its production. To get a better image of the designer's intent and the production process, we contacted the designer. Tom wrote, I quote, "At the time, my studio was next door to a sex shop where I was introduced to a man that was manufacturing small batches of rubber and fetish gear for people that like to wear that kind of thing." End of quote. He had made only 4 or 5 of these with latex cover, and each a pattern was made directly from the first frame. The cover is made of a very thin latex rubber with 0.7 meters, stretched over the steel frame and closed with a plastic zipper at the back at the bottom. Within a few years, the chair cover became brittle and sticky. The formation of tears led to heavy deformations and the urgent need of a conservation treatment. A first consolidation treatment wasn't sufficient. The remaining mechanical stress on the latex cover, the permanent impact of oxygen, light, and the close contact to the metal frame accelerated further degradation and made other options necessary. Our vision was to conserve this prototype as a whole, but the conditions of its 2 main elements, the metal frame and the latex cover, drifted seriously apart. While the frame was still in a very good condition, the rubber cover degraded so badly that the original idea and the design of the chair changed dramatically. To match both the conservation of the material as well as the conservation of Dixon's aesthetical idea, we decided to go for a reconstructing conservation concept. We were measuring the original cover with pattern. We took the thickness, the position of the rubber welding and the zipper colors, etc. Then we were consolidating the material and removed it from the frame and put the original cover in an oxygen-free storage, as you see on the right side of the image. And then we reconstruct the original cover at a manufacturer who was specialized on the production of latex rubber and clothes. Both covers are now stored pressure-relieved in gas-tight film bags equipped with oxygen absorbers under the exclusion of light. Then we have an interdisciplinary research as an example. Investigation into technology and degradation leads to conservation, Futuro and UFO-shaped house. In 1965, An UFO-shaped house was designed by the Finnish architect Matti Suronen. The outer shell comprises a sandwich construction of glass fiber reinforced polyester filled with polyester polyurethane hard foam. Due to nearly 50 years of weathering, the outer shell of the house was in a very poor condition. Regarding the design historical importance of the Futuro and its complexity in synthetic materials, different aspects were projected in 2005. Documenting of condition, material and technology, virtual documentation and display by means of three-dimensional laser scan technology, analysis and influence of microorganisms on polyester surfaces, consolidation of the delaminated top coat. This project was supported by conservation scientists, geodesists, a microbiologist and a Finnish researcher on Futuro houses. When our museum acquired a Futuro house 10 years later, the personnel network and data obtained from the 2005 project were of invaluable help to understand its condition and to define the right handling instructions and an appropriate conservation concept. Our key issue in this project was the careful repair of the laminate inner structure, which was gravely damaged by improper means of renovation some years before. In this context, we were cooperating with a research center for plastic laminates, a specialist firm for metal processing, electricians, architects and engineers. By means of regular meetings on site, we discussed the progress of work to define further proceedings. The building was installed in front of the Pinakothek of Modern in June 2017. I hope my brief navel gazing has given you an idea of the challenges of preserving design objects at the museum. As promised, I would now like to conclude with a brief spotlight on the tasks and challenges of our daily and less daily activities in the museum. Our conservation department covers a very wide range of activities, including both everyday routine work, but also challenging research tasks. Classic activities include regular object inspection and documentation of the actual condition, comprehensive pest monitoring of exhibits on display and in storage, inventorying of new acquisitions. We have an average of 3,000 new objects per year. Preparation and follow-up on internal and external exhibition activities, as well as acute conservation and restoration treatments on collection objects, and last but not least, advising on acquisitions and donations with regard to condition, material, and authenticity. With regular guided tours through current exhibitions and into the conservation workshops, we familiarize the interested public with conservation work and open up unusual perspectives on design objects and new technologies. In addition, our conservation department plays an active role in networking and sharing expertise and participates in national and international research projects on the conservation of design objects. In this context, we have just launched together with the Getty Conservation Institute, the TH in Cologne and the Wende Museum of the Cold War in Los Angeles, an international research project on GDR plastics. Moreover, we offer internships for students from 3 to 6 months from international universities and supervise bachelor's and master theses. In addition to participating in international conferences and giving numerous lectures on the conservation of plastics, we have been lecturing at the academies in Vienna and in Stuttgart. And once upon a time in Doha, Qatar, that's why I bring this image. It becomes obvious that the focus on the conservation of modern materials in design, even more than in the other classical conservation fields, requires interdisciplinary networking. It is obvious that for a professional conservation of design objects, the knowledge on the applied technologies is indispensable. The objects we deal with are the result of the interaction of creative people with engineers and industry. Accordingly, such objects usually follow a very precise manufacturing process. Only the involvement of the designer, the engineering, the conservation science, and sometimes the producers creates a comprehensive understanding of the object and thus allow the profound definition of a concept of measures for the further conservation of design objects. Another essential aspect is the research on the aging of modern materials. Since the early 1990s, there have been first research projects and conferences in this field. Nevertheless, the practice-oriented discussion initially lagged far behind the range of conferences dealing with fundamental ethical questions about the conservation of modern materials. This was the motivation for us to initiate an international conference format which offers object-oriented approaches to the restoration and conservation of modern heritage. With great support from the experts in the field, we organized the first Future Talks conference in October 2009 at the Pinakothek der Moderne in Munich. The unexpected great international success confirmed and promoted our idea to establish an international platform for knowledge transfer and conservation of modern heritage. After now 6 conferences with more than 1,200 participants from 30 nations, we have probably come much closer to this goal with the Future Talks. Experts in this field, as well as newcomers, have a forum here to get to know each other in a pleasant atmosphere and to exchange professional ideas. This also includes disciplines from outside the field, which should open up the often very narrow view for us conservators. The Future Talks consist of workshops, keynote lectures, and interdisciplinary panel discussions. The results of this conference series have been published in 5 conference proceedings to date. The next, the 7th Future Talks conference, Future Talks 2021, Smart Solutions in the Conservation of the Modern, will take place this year from November 8 to 10, firstly in a digital format as an online conference. Currently, the call for paper is closed and we are creating the program. Last but not least, I would like to highlight that the external success of the Future Talks conference series has also fostered other positive internal developments for our conservation department. It shows how even a very small team can make a significant contribution through motivation, perseverance, and creativity. Second, with the success of the Future Talk, the perception and evaluation of our conservation department has changed significantly in a positive way, both towards the curators of our house and in the public perception as an international cooperation, projects and lectures, etc. Third, our department has advanced to become a serious interlocutor for designers. And fourth, the possibilities of acquiring third-party funding have been significantly improved. Furthermore, our department is increasingly involved in curatorial and strategic decisions. For example, in 2015, we worked with German best-known industrial designer Konstantin Kricic to develop an exhibition concept in which his 3-dimensional designs for Chair 1 were shown, both from a design-specific perspective and at the same time the perspective of the musealization of these objects was illuminated on the basis of conservation considerations and restoration measures. As a responsible curator, I have been accompanying the dismantling, restoration and installation of an original Futuro house, both conservationally and conceptually, and have also been charged with the development and realization of the year-long accompanying program. In summary, my perspective has increasingly opened up from the individual object to the entire collection. I now spend significantly more time organizing the Future Talks, lectures, teaching, events, and guided tours, as well as acquiring potential sponsors, project and media partners, and press organs. This is what I had to say, and I look forward to what I'm sure is a controversial discussion. Thank you.
Yes, Tim, thank you so much for this very inspiring talk. And now I still remember very well when we brought our students to Munich and you gave us a guided tour, and we're standing outside and talking and going into the Futuro. It was really amazing. So there are some questions for you, and we take those questions now because Tim has to leave a little bit early. Perhaps we start, just let me see, with a question from Vincent. Vincent asks, in what way does the approach of the conservation of modern furniture differ from that of historical furniture?
I would say the point is that very often you don't have the knowledge about the material is not that broad or not that traditional than compared to classical furniture. So when you learn furniture conservation, you learn how to deal with different problems, and you have your tools for this. But if you go in this area of modern design objects, it seems for us it's different now because we have quite a lot of experience. But there is so many differences when it comes to the material, to the technology. I would say most of the time you stand there and begin at zero, looking, okay, how is it made? What are the materials? Where can I get information about the object? And it seems, from the first sight, it seems it could be quite easy because you just have to ask the designer, you just have to ask the producer. But that's not that easy. Most of all, the producers are very quiet if you go there asking for receipts or for techniques, technologies, for material samples. That's the difference. I would say that's the main difference.
Yeah. Here's another interesting question from Welmoed Kreb. Are designers, artists also involved in the actual treatment of object? What is their influence on your decisions?
That's a good question. I have to say they don't have any influence, or they have influence, but they are not deciding how we conserve the object. But as I mentioned earlier, for example, at the Chair 1 project, it was really important, very important to talk to the designer, because in some cases we had chairs with backrests which came down and which couldn't stand by itself. And from our perspective, we thought, okay, we have to consolidate this backrest and to make it look like it is a chair model. And then we were talking to the design to Konstantin Kricic, and he told us that this model always tended to have a loose backrest, and they fixed it with sellotape to make photos, but it was never stable. So just from this argument, from this point, we decided we won't make it more stable as it was before. So just to give you an idea. But of course, we are talking to some designers who said, okay, come on, I give you a new one, or I make it new. That's not what we want. If we have a serious production, of course, if you can buy a new one, then we always would go and look for a new one. But we are, as a collection, of course, we are interested in models, in prototypes, in the design process. And at that point, there is no chance to buy a new one or to renew an object. And this is not what we wanted. So we are really interested in the traces, in the traces of use, in the traces of time. But it's always a new discussion when it comes to the intention of the designer, the aesthetical thing, the colors. That's always something we discuss at each time new.
Yeah, I can imagine that. And I think there's a question that ties in very well with that. Andreas Grupa says, thank you for the interesting cases. And he asks, what is the approach of the Neue Sammlung to function? And did somebody sit in the latex chair? That is a very interesting question, I think. Who damaged?
Thanks, Andreas, and hello, hi. No, the latex was presented in a shelf at approximately 3 or 4 meters high, so there wasn't a chance to sit in it, and we didn't intend it to. But this was a problem because therefore we recognized too early, too late, very late, that it started to crack. But no, the question when it comes to function, that's normally not our discussion. I'm lucky to say this because we are interested in the form, in the design, and not in the function. But you can imagine that the last 10 years, I would say, there's a big change in the design process. So if you just think about the development of the iPhone, for example, there's nearly no or very little change in the outer shell design, but quite a lot of change in the software and the applications in the interface. And this is really a problem we're discussing and we're confronted to. And to be honest, in this case, we don't have a solution now. We have more than 1,000 mobile phones, and it would be perfect to see them if you open it, if you see what kind of sound comes out of the phone. But for this, we had to run more than 1,000 accus alive. But in a certain field, we had started a project which is related to the function. It is 2 years ago, and it's called The Sound of Design. You can go on our website and you can download the sounds of design objects. And for this, we selected more than, I would say, 300 design objects. And we tried to make them work because we wanted to hear sounds which they produced. And most of them were coming from the industrial design section, which is toasters, electrical devices, vacuum cleaners, things like that. And you can go there and you can just click on the objects and you can hear the sound. And in this case, we did it, and it opens a totally new world, and we are convinced that it's totally important in some cases to have the sound of a internet connection from an early modem or things like that, or from a telephone ring, things like, I don't know the name. Yeah, I hope this answers your question.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Now the last question for now. Maybe other questions can be put on an email or something like that to you, that you can answer them. We had a question, the last one from Friederike Wentig, who thanks you for the great talk. And what was your most challenging object? Very interesting question, I think.
Hi, Friederike. I think the most important question, those who followed my career know that it's a Futuro house, because it's so fully stuffed with plastic materials, starting from the polyester fiberglass with isolation foam, polyurethane foam, inside the the perspex polymethylmethacrylate. There's so many different things coming together. Also the function of the house. So this is, at least I think this is one of the objects which made my were best I could do research on. But of course, what I really prefer is, when it comes to interesting objects, are the one-off pieces, the prototypes, the models, because there you really can see how a design is developed and what is the idea behind a product, and this is always something which is totally amazing if you have something like this. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much again, Tim. Unfortunately, we can't have a longer discussion about this very interesting topic. And thank you so much for your very inspiring talk.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. Now, due to technical difficulties at last week's session, there was one poster that couldn't be presented. And now we would like to give Sofie Dierickx and her co-authors from the University of Antwerp the opportunity to show us their research before we start with today's scheduled student talks. So let's hear more about TOCOWO, the topography of Congolese wooden objects. Sofie, please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me.
We can.
Okay, great. I'm very happy to be able to tell you all a bit about my work in this short presentation. I have been working as a research assistant on the TOCOWO project since September of last year, and TOCOWO stands for Tomography of Congolese Wooden Objects, and is a brain project funded by Belspo for 2 years, and is a collaboration between the Royal Museum for Central Africa in Tervuren and the University of Ghent. I hope the next slide is showing.
It is indeed.
Okay, good. Sorry. The museum houses a large collection of wooden objects, and only a small percentage of these has the wood species ever been determined. Only about 6% of all wooden objects. And it is quite important to know the wood species of a museum object. For example, if the object is to travel abroad for loans or traveling exhibitions, the museum has to prove the object isn't made from species on the endangered species list, like the one CICS has drafted. Unfortunately, the current method, the most used method for determining wood species, is a destructive one still, where a sample from the object is removed and sliced up to put under the microscope. I have added some examples here to show from objects that have been identified and sampled in the 1970s and 80s, which still show the evidence of this sampling to this day. The aim of the TOCOWO project is to explore the possibilities of micron and submicron CT for anatomical research of wood. The biggest advantage of this technique is that it allows us a view of the wood anatomy without altering the object in the least, and an added advantage is that the resulting scan allows a 3D view inside of the object, as it turns 360 degrees while being scanned. I'm still in the very first phase of this research, but can already share some thoughts about the scans made in the first week of February this year. On this slide, you can see on the left the widest object scanned last February, an Enkisi or nail statue, which is ascribed powers by its culture. And on its right is a statue, then a drum, and on the far right object is also a power object with a power package around the middle. For each object, first an overall scan was made, and then a region of interest was targeted, a narrower part of the object, to try and achieve a better resolution. And the best resolution we got was for the far right object, where we scanned the head and got to a 5 micron resolution of the wood inside. A few of the objects scanned last February contained materials other than just wood, and the effect of, for example, metal, beads, pigments, or natural fibers can be seen on this slide. Although there is a clear loss of information due to the present metal for the first 3 objects, it is not detrimental to the view of the wood, as we can travel inside the 3D scans and find large areas where the wood is visible. For example, for the Enkisi object on the left, there is a lot of metal nails inside of it, but if we travel down into the object, we can find a clear view of the wood. At this point in the project, I am focusing on the actual identification of the wood, and to do this, I look inside the 3D scans of the object to select the best cross-sections to view the anatomical features. I describe the features I can see and compare these to reference databases, both online and available in the museum, to narrow down family, genus, and hopefully species. In this last slide, I wanted to show the diagnostic value of the scans, which might not be the main focus of this research, but is an added benefit for our museum's conservation department. In the drum on the left, we could see the evidence of insect activity on the surface, but with the scan, we could establish how deep the infestation went. And for the middle statue, we had no idea before scanning that an insect had been active inside, but the scans clearly show the passage of a large insect entering, moving up and down inside the object, and then exiting again. And the scan on the far right statue shows us the evidence of an old restoration where the arm was reattached. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to be able to tell you all a lot more very soon.
Thank you very much, Sophie. That was great. And yes, please put your questions for Sophie in the chat, and she will answer them in the Q&A session that will come later. So I think both your approach to non-invasive wood identification as well as the tropical species you covered are out of the ordinary and thus fit today's theme just perfectly. But let's quickly proceed to our first paper presentation of today. And I'm very proud to announce PhD student Tabea Vietzke from our own university in Potsdam. And her talk is about a straw marquetry factory in southern Germany that produced intricate little objects in the 19th century. So Tabea, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Angelika, for your words. Yeah. Video will be turned on because my internet connection is not too good, but yeah, we will see. So first of all, I also would like to thank the organizers for making this nice conference happen, and yeah, I'm happy about the chance to speak here today. So as already mentioned, this talk will focus on shedding light on a so far unknown gem of European and especially southern Germany's cultural history. As already said as well, I will work on this topic as a PhD thesis, and I would like to share my first findings with you in this presentation. And as the straw mosaic factory of Ebert, situated in the town of Ansbach, was apparently one of the largest production facilities, it will serve us as basis for our short review on the distribution and technique of straw mosaic in the 19th century. The factory was founded by Karl Ludwig Weppler and Friedrich Ebert in 1846 and persisted more than 80 years. Numerous employees, particularly young women, produced mainly fancy goods, which were exported to many European countries and sold there as souvenirs. In general, the overall design is quite consistent, and therefore objects can be attributed to the factory of Ebert relatively easily. The objects, mainly caskets, were designed in straw mosaic technique resembling to template ware. Obviously, embroidery patterns served as templates for the motifs, which are in most cases flower bouquets. This central motif on the lid is usually framed by a stylized brad. In many cases, all were added. The sides are decorated with narrow black lines highlighting the edges, and depending on the size of the objects, the sides are also often decorated with simple geometric patterns. Likewise, the inside and bottom are decorated in recognizable designs. In most cases, the inside is embellished with a checkerboard-like pattern or with embossed metal foil. The bottom is usually decorated with light and dark stripes of straw in different variations. And another typical feature is the plain edge between lid and corpus, which is very often stained in bright colors. Beside those caskets, a great variety of other small items was decorated with straw mosaic in the factory as well. Later, presumably by the end of the 19th century, the design was more geometric. Figural motifs disappeared completely. Also, town names seemed to disappear. Nevertheless, the design is still quite recognizable, and all kinds of different objects were still decorated with straw mosaic in the factory of Ebert. As mentioned, these goods were mostly exported to many European countries and sold there as souvenirs, which is perfectly emphasized by these two caskets. Both show nearly the same design, and especially the motif is just the same pattern. But one object is inscribed Viva España and the other Souvenir de Cannes. Other inscriptions that can be found on Ansbach's products are, for example, Souvenir de Lourdes, Souvenir de Vichy, Ricortado di Torino, Lugano, Ricortado di Venezia, Niederbronn, Mistroy, or the simple word souvenir. And according to the contemporary newspaper articles, indeed, the factory exported its products, among other countries, to Holland, Belgium, Saxony, Prussia, England, Italy, and even to Turkey. And as if it wasn't astonishing enough to discover the craftsmanship of straw mosaic, which is commonly unknown today, and to discover its enormous production in a small town in Middle Franconia, it turned out there were even more places in which straw mosaic was produced on big scale. The most important sites were panel institutions, such as Strafanstalt Lichtenau near Ansbach and Strafanstalt St. Georgen near Bayreuth, where prisoners produced straw mosaic objects. Apparently, Kress and Oppel in Kloster Ebrach sold products also originating from prisons. In the region of Rhön, numerous individual manufacturers were grouped together under the term Rhön Depot, with its center in Würzburg. Here, even a trade school was founded in Hildes, which is north of Würzburg, and where, among other things, straw mosaic was taught. In Heilbronn, Weppler, one of the founders in Ansbach, founded his own straw mosaic factory after he moved back to his hometown. And in Nördlingen, apparently straw was grown especially for artistic use, as the panel institution of St. Georgen purchased wheat straw from here. Therefore, it seems most likely that Nördlingen was source of supply for other producers as well. Unfortunately, for most straw mosaic objects, it's not yet possible to deduce where they were made. Thanks to design features, several objects can be grouped together, suggesting they may have been made in the same workshop, but the products from the factory of Ebert in Ansbach are so far the only ones which can be clearly attributed. And this is only due to family-owned objects by a Mr. Krampf, who is descendant of one of the last owners of the factory, Mr. Wagenhöfer. Here we can see Wagenhöfer and his wife with their employees by the end of the 19th century. Moreover, the factory is outstanding, as Ebert and Weppler seem to be the first ones in the region to produce and export straw mosaic products on large scale. The owner of the factory in Ansbach changed at least 4 times over the course of 80 years, which suggests a quite profitable outcome. This leads me to the conclusion that one component of their Europe-wide success may have been the technique. When making marquetry or mosaic, firstly the straws must be stained and afterwards opened and flattened. Then one can glue them either directly on the object or on a piece of paper in order to produce sheets of veneer, which can then be used to create all kinds of motifs or decorations. For straw mosaic work, we had to first produce straw sheets of all required colors according to the template. I have to remark that the following technique is not yet proven, but after studying the objects, it seems to me the most likely way of how the straw mosaics were made. So presumably, the veneer sheets were cut into small stripes and were put together row by row on another sheet of paper. And the longer these sheets are, the more motifs can eventually be made out of it at once. Afterwards, the sheets were cut row by row again into small stripes. And finally, the rows could be put together, creating the finished motif. In this way, it is possible to produce the same motif in a relatively large numbers within a relatively short time. Moreover, the employees mustn't have artistic abilities, and it was comparably easy to master the technique and to realize all kinds of patterns. Thus, I think it's mainly the technique which enabled the factory to produce handmade items, but in a mostly industrialized mass production, and led in this way to its Europe-wide success. The used materials were not yet analyzed, so I'm not able to go too much into detail here, but I can share a few first hints with you. The most obvious one is the blue paper under the straw. It is called sugar paper and was widely used as inexpensive wrapping material. Here it was certainly used to produce the straw mosaics and maybe as well as lining for the substructure. The corpuses are mainly made of wood and smaller ones of cardboard, which were also produced in the factory itself. As mentioned, the straw came probably from Nördlingen, where wheat straw was grown, but any other type of straw could have been used as well. As adhesive agent, probably animal or starch glue was used. The presumption is due to a newspaper advertisement by a starch factory owner in Ansbach. He produced starch glue, which was, as he claims, just as good as animal glue. In his advertisement, he addressed, next to carpenters, particularly straw mosaic producers. For simplifying the handicraft of straw mosaic production, now and then machines are mentioned. For example, a specialized cutting machine developed in the trade school of Hildes. But unfortunately, I have not yet found a description, or thus much more still remains to be discovered in this field. Another question is what motivated Ebert and Weppler to set up a straw mosaic factory in Ansbach. France might be a source of inspiration, as here a great number of caskets with straw marquetry was made, like the one on the right upper side. They were handmade by prisoners in so-called bagnots, prisons in French naval ports, like for example in Rochefort, Toulon or Brest. Those items were sold on site for very low prices as souvenirs. They may have come to Ansbach via Schillingsfürst, a small town nearby, in which French foreign legions were stationed. This theory is strengthened by a townscape of Schillingsfürst, which you can see on the left upper side. By the way, that was restored at the FH Potsdam by Irene Menenghetti. In comparison with other objects, it is made in a very French style. The same applies to the casket beneath, displaying a townscape of Ansbach, and the casket next to it, showing a townscape of Heilbronn, which was made by Weppler. In whatever way, the striking parallels suggest a strong connection to France. On the other hand, the technique and design of the objects made in the factory of Ebert strongly resemble English sandwichware objects, like you can see here on the left upper side. Therefore, these might be a source of inspiration as well. Sandwichware objects were also made in mass production and were often sold as souvenirs. Aside from that, the technique to decorate objects with small scrapes of straw is not new though. It was used, for example, in the typical Florentine stitch pattern on straw marquetry objects, as you can see on the right upper side. But customizing this technique for realizing embroidery patterns in straw seems to be indeed a new idea. But it is difficult to figure out whether the idea was born in Ansbach or if the founders rather were collecting and combining things. The casket on the right side, for example, is decorated with a remarkable straw mosaic picture on the lid. It is part of the collection Museum Europäischer Kulturen in Berlin and was as well restored at the FH Potsdam by Marisa Zengin. Interestingly, the motif is much more complex. It gives the impression to be really made scrape by scrape. The rest of the casket and its structure resemble more the French caskets. But then again, the design is very close to the tea caddy in the middle, with embossed metal foil inside and blue paper under the straw, just like it is typical for objects from Ansbach. Also, the casket on the right side shows similar design features. This one is said to be made in Saxony in the town of Dippoldiswalde. Likewise, other objects emphasize a connection to Saxony too. Here, many objects were decorated with straw mosaic in the 19th century, especially Noah's Arks and other children's toys. Even in GDR times, straw pictures were still mass-produced under the division of labor in the nationally owned enterprise VEB Neugersdorf. Unfortunately, until now, only instructions for the general production of straw marquetries are known, like this one here from the early 19th century. It is quite detailed, explaining many techniques for making straw marquetry and which materials are required. It even figures tools and machines. I hope to find other sources like this, explaining the technique of straw mosaic and needed tools, materials, and machines in detail. In combination with traces found on the objects, it will hopefully lead to a new understanding of straw mosaic works. Beside the evaluation of techniques and design features, I plan also including material analysis and further investigations. Surely this will bring new findings to light and will hopefully result in a clear reference points for indicating an object's origin. Moreover, the knowledge of that forgotten craftsmanship is fundamental for the conservation and restoration of such objects as historical artifacts. But only if we are able to tell their stories, and with them the story of an industrial branch we know nearly nothing about anymore, museums and private persons will see a value in the treatment of straw mosaic objects. Thank you very much for listening.
Tabea, thank you very much for this fascinating talk, and there are quite a lot of questions in the chat, which will have to wait till after the next talk, and give over to Jörg.
Yes, thank you, Tabea. What an excellent talk. Next, I have the honor to announce the master student Sterre Van der Weerd from the University of Amsterdam. Sterre's talk is about an exceptional marquetry technique consisting of animal glue veneer. Sterre, here you go.
Thank you. Hello all. First of all, I would like to give a great thanks to the Chiefs of ConNext for this well-organized and superb opportunity to be together and share together. My presentation is about glue veneer, or colored sheets of animal glue. Would you think it be possible to decorate objects with it? Well, for those who don't, here you can see brightly colored pieces of marquetry decoration that are made of animal glue. For the purpose of a restoration, I had to investigate this material, and I would like to share what I found about recognizing, treating, and also reconstructing animal glue marquetry. This is the object I had to look after. A little pendulum clock of approximately 50 centimeters high that is decorated with black colored veneer, bronze and brass metalwork, and the brightly colored marquetry. At first encounter, I had no idea what this material was made of. Very apparent are the bright and opaque colors and the gloss and paste-like appearance. So I first thought about casein, a milk product, or maybe an early synthetic plastic. And the only reason I found that this was made of animal glue is because I was able to do material analysis with gas chromatography. I will talk about that later. But animal glue, I got intrigued because how do you get from a liquid thermoplastic glue to a colored veneer? And how is a material that is in fact moisture and temperature sensitive, how can it be a durable inlay material like here? So I wanted to know much more about this, and starting with object research. Here I collected some objects that show a range of colorful inlay materials used on furniture in the 19th century. On the left you see a writing box that is decorated with blue colored horn and red colored tortoiseshell. Not so special at first sight, but the table in the middle and the writing chest on the right, both dated from around 1850, have inlay materials like the blue things here and the yellow parts there, that are indicated as colored pastes, suggesting that the conservators do not always recognize what this paste-like material exactly is. From literature, I understood that since the 1830s, several furniture makers, especially in Germany, started to experiment with new inlay materials. Following on colored horn and ivory that we already knew, they tried to use casein, gelatin, and animal glue. Especially the maker of this table in the middle, Carl Friedrich Plambeck, is well known for making marquetry made of protein pastes. And some furniture companies even sold their protein or glue veneers to the market. During my object research, I actually encountered a striking amount of clocks that have similarities to my clock that is shown here on the right. Look, for example, at a classical build-up, the turned pillars, but also the metalwork. It is quite similar to the ones on my clock. And also, of course, the appearance and colors of the inlay materials. Look at the green and the pink, the red are very similar to each other and to the clock. And I should not forget to say that this picture is a detail of this clock and this of this clock. Let's see. So I think the similarities between these clocks suggest that these clocks and mine could be made in 1 or 2 ateliers that then used these paste-like materials as a decoration. I also did some research in historical technical sources. You can see here a few magazines that are published between the 1830s and 1890s. And in these magazines, information is given about ingredients and production methods to make glue veneer. For example, the source here, Lehner from 1893, describes a process to make sheets of glue veneer. And what he says is that the following: a hot substance of glue is poured onto a glass plate that is fixed to a table and can be leveled. You see this table over here, and the idea is that the liquid glue is spread over the glass plate and over 2 metal rulers to determine the thickness, a few millimeters, of the veneer. And very important, Lena says, one needs to lift the sheets of veneer from the glass plate before they are entirely dry, and then harden them further in an oven. Lena also names some additives like glycerin that functions to make the sheets more elastic and workable. Another article by Karmash, here shown on the right from 1857, mentions 2 different recipes with ingredients for making glue veneer. He says you can mix glue plus alum and pigments, alum as a dry component, or glue and chalk with pigments. So 3 ingredients, and the sheets are then obtained by pouring the hot substance over a polished mirror. So again, this author names a flat glass plate to obtain the flat surface of the veneer sheets. I could use this information for as a reference frame for the treatment of the marquetry on my clock and for the planned reconstruction. Let's go back to the clock. The aim of the restoration was to bring the clock back into aesthetic unity and prevent further degradation. Well, the treatment of the clock then included cleaning of the black veneer, cleaning of the metal, and the marquetry itself needed treatment because of several damages, and much of the material is missing. On the left here, I indicated which pieces in the marquetry are missing currently, and on the right you see that the marquetry is made of 9 different colors, and that the sheets are measured as 0.8 millimeters thick. Oh, the next slide. Some closer visual observations, also done with microscopes here, show different aspects of the degradation of the marquetry and the current physical condition. Most marquetry pieces, as you can see here, show cracks. Some pieces are cupping, and other pieces are even curling up from the ground material, which suggests it's maybe an indication about how the material reacts to its surroundings, like to moisten the air. And in some pictures, it is visible that some pieces are discolored, or a surface layer is degraded. For example, look at the front and back of this leaf and the front and back of this blue part. Furthermore, carefully looking at the edges of the pieces of veneer, there we can see that there are traces of a jigsaw or another saw visible, also visible from the evenly thick lines in these pink parts. Another step in the process to dig into this animal glue is technical analysis, and that actually delivered very interesting information. It helped to indicate the binding medium and also some pigments in the marquetry on the clock. On the left, you see the results of the gas chromatography, where you pull apart a sample on molecular level, and for me, it detected the presence of animal glue, as I said. And by the report done by Henk van Keulen, he especially indicated that my piece of marquetry had the best correlation with animal glue and far less with casein. I asked him to investigate that too because of the similarities between these materials. Then also I did investigation with XRF on more different types of the colored marquetry. And the analyst said that the green marquetry, he analyzed the results of this. He said the green marquetry contains chromium, and that could probably be, for example, a chromium green, chrome oxide green. And we will see later that I could use that in my reconstruction. Also in a lot of the colors, like the pink and also the yellow, and I thought also the green, lead was indicated, and that suggested the possible presence of lead white. So it is possible that some of the colors were mingled using lead white. Well, a lot of information, and I tried to combine the results from the object analysis, the magazine sources, the visual observations, and I decided to undertake an experimental reconstruction of the glue veneer. And I aim to find more information about the chemical and physical character of glue veneer and get a better grip on how this material works, also for treatment and interpreting my original marquetry. So I try to replicate some of the missing parts in the marquetry with the use of animal glue. I will now go through a few of the steps that I undertook in this reconstruction, starting with making flat sheets of veneer. As you can remember, maybe in the sources it was said that hot glue was applied liquid on a glass plate, and I tried to mimic that. But since liquid animal glue releases water and shrinks during drying, of course, I found out that an unrestricted piece of glue on a glass plate tends to deform during the drying process. It tends to curl off and deforms from your glass plate. You can see that a little bit on the right. The best method for me to obtain a flat and rigid sheet was to pour the hot glue onto a glass plate, but into a frame, a wooden one or a plastic one. And the thing is that halfway to drying, you can lift that frame off your glass plate, also to prevent it from sticking to the glass plate, because it is still glue. And by drying it upright, when the sheet of glue is still in the frame, you dry it upright and you end up with a very flat sheet of veneer that has a smooth surface, resulting from the connection to the glass plate that was there before. Of course, you are wondering what type of glue I used. I tried different mixtures of animal glue, and I found out that 100% hide glue is quite hard and brittle, and later not so easy to solve, while the 50% so a mixture of hide and bone glue worked quite well, and I decided to use that as a basis. Could be investigated any further, of course. It's very interesting. The trick is, in general, to make a good consistency of the hot glue, because adding too much water, of course, to make it liquid, to pour it more easy on your glass, all that water needs to evaporate and influences the shrinkage later. So I better heat it, the glue, to make it less viscous and make it easy to pour it on the glass plate. And in total, you have to work very quickly and have a few seconds to spread your glue frame into an evenly thick sheet. And I just did it by tilting the glass plate. And yeah, so I obtained several sheets of glue veneer sheets. Another step was, of course, the coloring of the glue to match the original colors, on the clock. And not so strange, maybe, that colorants appear to be too transparent to match the opaque character of the original pieces. And I eventually decided just to use pure pigments that I dryly added to the hot glue. Remember that the XRF analysis named chrome as a part of as present in one of the green leaves, and indeed chrome oxide green, the pigment on chrome oxide green, appears to match very well with one of the original leaves on the clock. This is one of the original marquetry pieces, and this is one of the reconstruction sheets made with this pigment. Relating the choice of the pigments, I also tried cadmium yellow, and that that approximates the yellow pieces quite okay. Apart from the fact that you can see here the degraded state of the marquetry, which I indicated previously, needs to be taken into account as well. The darkened or bit dirty surface appearance. I could do it by adding something to this glue, or maybe add a dirty shellac or something. Need some experiment. Here you see other trials of matching the colors of the reconstruction pieces to the original ones. These squares are reconstruction glue pieces, and on top are lying original pieces. Iron red, for example, is a bit too warm and too red and shows crumbs of pigment, while a very cheap acrylic paint out of a tube with the addition of a little black approximates one of the red pieces quite nicely. This is also true for the blue part here and here. And on the right you see that I also try to grind the pigments in a paste, and then adding them in form of a paste to the glue. I try to do that to prevent crumbs showing in the veneer, like here. I see that I have 1 minute and I have 2 slides left. Here you see the shaping of the glue sheets with a saw. With a saw, I managed to make a 1-to-1 replica of the original bouquet on the clock. I hope you can still hear me, because I hear now that my connection is not so good. I experienced that the hide glue was 100% hide glue is a bit too brittle, but the mixture of bone glue and hide glue is very nice to saw and actually feels like a cookie, and you can steer very sharply through the material to make very tiny pieces. This last slide shows that I made some fillings in the original marquetry. This piece and this piece and this piece are fillings in the marquetry, and made with chromium green animal glue and shaped with a saw and a file. Obviously, a lot of improvements need to be made on this method, but in conclusion, the entire reconstruction proved that it is very much possible to create marquetry pieces or fillings out of colored animal glue with just a few ingredients and just a few steps. Okay, so far a story about colorful glue veneer on furniture. If there would be someone with a question, I am willing to answer them in the question session. Good luck for the next speakers, and thank you.
Thank you very much for your very interesting talk, Sterre. There are still so many techniques not being properly researched yet. It's nice that we now know a little bit more about this particular form of decoration. Now we have a short Q&A session. I see we have quite a few questions in the chat box. Let's start with Sofie. Sofie, can you unmute your microphone, please?
Hello.
Hello. Here's one question from Vincent. He asks, hi Sophie, what is the spatial resolution of the CT? Is it sufficient to see all the anatomical features needed to identify the wood species properly?
So depending on the size of objects, we had resolutions ranging from 160 microns to 5 microns. And I'm currently finding out which resolution is sufficient to recognize enough anatomical features to get an identification, but sometimes already a rougher resolution is already enough to eliminate some species or stuff like that. So it's ongoing, but yeah, the better the resolution, the more you can see.
Mm-hmm. And are you connected to experts of wood determination, or could you do this by yourself? That's a question for myself.
I am very lucky that the museum has a wood biology department, and so they are the experts that are here in Belgium are linked to the wood biology department of the museum. So I am linked to my professor for a PhD that is linked to this is Wannes Hubo from the University of Ghent, and this is his expertise, tropical wood anatomy. So he's been coaching me and teaching me how to identify tropical wood species.
Thank you. I think now I hand over to Angelika, because we are running a little bit out of time. And thank you, Sophie, so far.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jörg and Sophie. Now we have a few questions for Tabea. And I know straw marquetry is a very kind of fascinating topic. For example, Tamar asked, was the straw a variety grown specifically for use in mosaic, or is it a byproduct of grain agriculture?
Yeah, it's not so easy to say by now, but in earlier times, in the 17th and 18th century, it's relatively sure that it really was grown, especially for artistic use, especially for the heads. The straw was for sure grown just for the heads, but for straw, it is also known that straw was grown especially for this for this use. And in the 19th century, it depends. Some sources say you should harvest the grain after the corn is finished, and some say you should do it before. So it depends on. But as I said, the St. Georgen ordered from Nördlingen, which is quite far away from Bayreuth. So I guess that Nördlingen really just produced straw for the artistic use, I guess. So I think it was special straw, but I do not know for sure yet.
Okay, we have another question for you with regard to materials. And Julia Schulz asks, is anything known about the stains used? Are they similar to wood stains? They are indeed, but I think you can answer this question.
Yeah, that's right. So they are similar to wood stains. That's right. And it's the 19th century, so they are more modern stains. But I have not analyzed the material yet, so I cannot tell you about the straw market or mosaic from the 19th century what was used, but the colors look really like the modern colors from the 19th century. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Perhaps one last question for you. Now, I was wondering, you found quite a lot of objects that were marked kind of being souvenir from Italy or France. Do you have any idea why these markets were targeted in particular?
I have two theories. The first one is that straw marquetry is kind of a French technique. So a lot of objects from France are still conserved, and it's they say it is originating from France. The technique was developed there and always have been there. So I think they just preserved these caskets because they knew it is straw. And in, for example, Germany, people do not appreciate the technique because they don't know it. And the second theory is that maybe, it was the 19th century, and it was not so common to travel and to be a tourist. And I think in Italy and also in France, it was maybe more common to just travel around and bring souvenirs to your beloved ones, I guess.
Okay, thank you very much, Tabea. Over to Jörg.
Yeah, thank you, Angelika. Sterre, are you there already?
Yes, I
Questions
am.
for you? Ah, very good.
Yeah.
Here's one question from Julia Schulz. Thanks, Sterre, for this talk. Did you heat or warm up the glass slides as well before pouring the glue?
Yes, I did. I tried to heat everything I used, like the grinding thing when I wanted to grind the pigments, and the glass plate I poured the glue on to extend the working time. But it was very difficult to work on that warmth table. But I did, yes.
Okay, thank you.
It gives me more time indeed.
Oh, yeah. Andreas Krupa from Cologne has another question, which is, have you found examples of patchy colored foils? For example, imitations of tortoise shell?
Patchy colored foils. No, I didn't come across those things. And in the relation of tortoiseshell, I think we can find animal glue used to imitate tortoiseshell quite a lot. I found also an object that was entirely decorated with imitation tortoiseshell. It was made of transparent animal glue. It was pigmented, but not in the form you mentioned with the foil. No, I didn't.
Okay, thank you. And then now the last question before we have a little break, which comes from Welmoed Kreb. Did any of the original pieces of your reconstructions become sticky? Do you have an idea what the black filling material might be? So 2 questions.
Thank you that you asked also the first question, because I forgot to say indeed that I tested my material. I made it a bit wet, and indeed it became sticky, and it also reacted to warmth. And I could use a very tiny iron and a sheet of Melinex to heat a little bit the cupped and curled sheets of the original material and flatten them a little bit. So that was one of the steps in the consolidation of my original marquetry. I forgot to say that. And your second question was about the filling material. I didn't analyze the filling material on my clock, but I read in sources that are about glue veneer that you can make that black material within the seams that is indeed present on my clock as well. You can make that by mixing gum copal varnish and vine black. So that's a thing from the sources, and on my clock it appears quite dull black and a bit crumbly, but I don't know what it is. I should investigate it in the future.
So thank you very much, our keynote speaker, Tim, who has left already, Sofie, Tabea, and Sterre. And thanks all for the many interesting questions. And we just had to choose some of those, and we will collect the remaining questions and then forward them to our speakers so they can have a look at them later. Although we are running late, I think we all need a little break. So we are going to take a break of 10 minutes and we'll meet again at 20 minutes to 9. So I hope you can relax now, get yourself a cup of coffee or a nice cup of tea, and I see you again, or we see you again in 10 minutes. See you then. Bye.
Okay. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a break over there and are ready for more action. First, after the break, is Welmoed Kreb. Maybe we can have the presentation of Welmoed. Ah, thank you. Just like Sterre, Welmoed is a master student from the University of Amsterdam. Welmoed will present problems concerning disassembled wall paneling in museums. I think there are quite a number of those puzzles in different collections that require a systematic approach. Welmoed, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Good evening, everybody. My presentation will be about disassembled wall paneling in Dutch museum collections. Last November, we as wood and furniture students were asked to assist in an assessment of wall paneling from the depot of City Museum Zwolle. It became clear that this type of objects poses several specific problems. I have executed literature research and have asked several historic interior experts to find out about the problems and possible solutions. In my presentation, I will first specify the nature of the objects. Then I will talk about the typical problems that I have identified. I will look at the proposed solutions for some of the problems, and finally I will come back to our object from Zwolle. My main focus will be wooden wall paneling, but it became clear that it is better to consider an interior in full, so all the immovable interior elements of a room. This can then contain wall paneling, and wall coverings, but also ceilings, marble chimney pieces, pendant mirrors, and rarely also textiles such as carpet or curtains. Museums have in the past actively acquired entire interiors, so also including ceilings, for instance to convert them into so-called period rooms. These are furnished rooms in museums to educate the public on living habits or to serve as a decor for the display of objects. These period rooms were very popular during the first 3/4 of the 20th century. Objects could also be actively acquired by museums because they are style icons or for historical study. But also very often interiors enter a museum collection to salvage them from demolition or renovation, or because they are donated. So Dutch museums house a varied collection of complete interiors or of interior fragments. These can be interiors of living quarters, but also of shops, pubs, workshops, or industry. During a survey of the Dutch Cultural Heritage Agency to determine the size of this collection, they found 80 cases of interiors or of interior elements. But by far not all museums participated in this survey, and also some interiors were left out. I happen to know because also the Zwolle object was not mentioned in that survey. And it's not just museums that have wall paneling in storage, but also some museum houses can have dismantled wall paneling in the attic. So presumably there's much more than those 80 cases. The first problem with disassembled interiors is that of storage. Interiors can take up a lot of storage space, especially if also a stucco ceiling is present. An interior can easily consist of 150 to 300 elements, some very large and very heavy, such as a pendant mirror, some very small and delicate, such as fragments of carving. In crowded, not optimal storage facilities, the interior elements are put where they are least in the way, so behind closets or scaffolding, hung from the ceiling, stacked on top of each other, put in the attic or basement, etc. Also, museums often do not have spare space large or high enough to assemble an interior for assessment. These issues with storage can cause typical damage for wall paneling. What you see here are examples all from the Zwolle case. Pieces that are kept loose in the depot run much risk of impact damage, and wooden elements can get warped, which is a problem for reassembly. Dirt, of course, can also accumulate on the elements. A curator has observed that even after a short stay of 2 years in a depot, wall paneling will need major conservation treatment before it can be reinstalled again. The large risk of not optimal storage is dissociation. Elements of wall paneling can easily get separated from the object, or mixed up with other elements, of other objects, or they are not recognized for being an object at all. Especially since the recent trend for decollection, so that's the disposal of objects, there is an imminent danger for disposal of parts of interiors that are mistaken for loose fragments without context. This risk is particularly large in large museums where objects are divided over several departments and curators. Another thing that became apparent is that interior elements are often not well registered in AdLib. Many different terms are used for interior elements, so objects are notoriously hard to find. But also, very often the provenance of the elements was not registered, such as when and how it entered the collection, which is important in case of a desire for decollection. This object, for instance, of the Amsterdam Museum was completely absent in AdLib. The elements were discovered during preparations for moving to a new depot and then puzzled together to discover it to be a Baroque mantelpiece and ceiling decoration. Another problem is that the nature of the objects does not reveal information easily. There are many very similar objects, similar elements. It takes a lot of time and space and equipment to assemble dozens or hundreds of pieces of an interior to know what is present, how complete it is, how authentic it is, and in what condition. As said, the nature of these objects makes them extremely inaccessible. Inaccessible for assessment, but also for research and for the public. Not many interiors are on display anymore. Partly because the opinion on museum education and fashion for exhibitions has changed, and partly because interiors relatively take up a vast amount of museum space. Reinstallation of an interior involves much work and enormous costs. And although for a museum they take up storage space and have low use value, trying to find a new destination for interiors costs much more time, effort and money than just leaving them in a depot. It is often only when depots are moved that wall paneling or interiors do get assessed. Now we will explore some suggested solutions for some of the mentioned problems. For better storage, conservators suggest tailor-made solutions, tailor-made cases. This involves securing loose wooden panels so that warping is restricted, but that they can still move with changes in relative humidity. Crates are preferably closed against dirt and impact damage and as a buffer for changes in climate. Marble is to be stored on a long side, mirrors need to be placed in an upright position, etc. Materials have different needs. And to improve information on an object, archives can be accessed of the museum or of the original building and photographs of the Cultural Heritage Agency. But eventually an assessment on material needs to be done, and preferably on all elements, so not just a random sample, to really know what is present and in what condition. This can be illustrated by this object that had been a period room for 80 years in the Stedelijk Museum until 1975. This is presumably a painting of the original, and you can see already the difference in height. Only after assembly of the wall paneling and chimney piece in 2015, it was revealed how much of the original material and decoration had been lost by its conversion into a period room and how little of its authenticity had been preserved. Some suggestions are made to put the objects to use again. An obvious use of an interior would be to put it on permanent display again in a museum, as is done with the Beuningkamer from the Amsterdam Museum. In the Rijksmuseum, it is now on permanent display. Sometimes another museum, especially smaller museums, can be very happy having an interior on display, as it enhances the viewer experience. Interiors also sometimes are on temporary display, either traditionally or so like here in a more experimental style of exhibition. It is also advised to look for destinations outside of museums. Sometimes an object can go back to its original building. This happened, for instance, with a part of the green room of Prins Hendrikkade 142. Just the chimney piece is put back, but it was too expensive to transfer the whole interior, so most of it is still in depot. It is also an option to install interiors in other monuments, which has been done a lot in the past, but this is not done much nowadays because it conflicts with opinions about historical correctness. And this would involve a lot of alterations to an object to fit the new space. It will also cause new use damage. Commercial parties, such as hotels, sometimes have much more money to spend and a desire for something original. So for objects that are listed for decollection and where it is decided that it is ethical for them to be used up, this can be an option. So about our project in Zwolle. It was about the neoclassicist Blue Room of Dierickx 39 in Zwolle. There were pictures taken just before the demolition in 1951. And the wall paneling and the wall coverings of this interior had been brought to the Zwolle Museum after demolition to be converted into a period room. But also in that time, that proved to be too expensive. So these parts were left in the depot for nearly 70 years. Roughly the same problems that were mentioned before were also a problem with this object. Information of the provenance was present, but on the material aspect that was low. So we were asked to do an assessment of the wall paneling of the room. We have dry cleaned and photographed and described each of the more than 80 elements. We have also determined their location in the room and marked every piece with its own unique location, as you can see here and here. These are coordinates. We found that several parts were missing. All the right parts. This wall is actually quite complete. We also found that several pieces that were included actually were not part of the room. And we were allowed to browse the depot to look for elements that might be part of the room, and we found quite a few. We accidentally, however, caused new dissociation, including this fragment of carving that doesn't belong to it, and we realized that only later. To give an impression of what the room would look like in the current state, we made digital reconstructions of each of the walls. In the end, it was concluded by interior specialist Richard Harmony that the interior of the brew room is in fact exceptional and one of the most beautiful examples of a late 18th century Dutch interior, due to this pendant mirror, which is very rich, and due to the unity in decoration on wall coverings and wall paneling together, which is quite rare. The rediscovery of the room has yet to be announced in the press. So you have an insider's preview here that's not to be disclosed yet, please. And the future of the room has yet to be determined. I was told that there are several options considered, but which they are, I do not know. So it remains to be seen whether the room will have a new use or that it will go back to the depot for more years in hibernation. But at least now we have given it a face. Concluding, an hibernating existence in a depot is not optimal for interior elements. It can cause damage to wall paneling and much dissociation. It also reduces accessibility to the objects to almost zero. Finding a new use for the objects can of course also involve new user damage. And moreover, it is very expensive and takes a lot of time. But it can be done, especially if the presence of objects, the desire to give them a new destination, are made known to other museums and to other parties. But I fear that for most interiors, their near future will still lie somewhere in a depot. I'd like to thank these experts for assisting me in this research, and thank you all very much for your attention.
Thank you, Welmoed. That was great. Your talk clearly demonstrated that wall panelings are quite a challenge for any collection.
Okay, then next I have the honor to announce Franziska Timmermann from CICS Cologne. Franziska's talk is a bit different. It's not strictly wood related, but deals with biological specimens embedded in acrylates and polyester. Franziska, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. I will share my video. One moment. Yeah. And good evening to everybody. Yeah, as you've already mentioned, our department at the CICS not only deals with wooden objects, but also with modern materials. So I will talk about plastics. We've already heard a great overview of the challenges of plastics in conservation from Tim Bechthold. However, as we can find plastics everywhere, I will not talk about design objects, but about natural history objects. More precisely about so-called inclusion specimens. These are animals embedded in transparent synthetic resin. The method has been used by taxidermists since about the 1950s, mainly for the production of teaching aids, because the transparent blocks offer a view of the embedded animal from all sides and can be easily transported and passed around in class. For example, to illustrate the stages of embryonic development, such as from this chicken or from this mouse. The objects I am dealing with in my master studies belong to the Ruhr Museum in Essen, which shows the cultural, social, and natural history of the Ruhr area. In total, the museum owns 89 of these inclusion specimens, which, as you see in the picture, animals such as mammals, birds, amphibians. The objects were taken over in 2010 from another museum, which had to close for financial reasons, and they were probably made in the 1970s or 80s. Some of the objects were made from unsaturated polyester resin, but the majority was made of polymethylmethacrylate, which I will refer to as PMMA in the following. PMMA is what most of you probably know under the trade names plexiglass or perspex. So why am I dealing with these specimens? Over time, the embedding material has changed in different ways. On one hand, there is a change in color in the form of yellowing, which of polyester, as you can see here in these two pictures, and on the other hand, structural damage, which rather affects the objects made of PMMA. Here, for example, loss of transparency and cracks are to be mentioned. In addition, these white three-dimensional formations occur in some objects for which I do not yet have a name, and urgent treatment is required for some objects from which a liquid is leaking, such as on this specimen. The object is stored in a polyethylene bag, and you can see small drops on the bag and that it sticks to the object. So the liquid probably migrates out of the object. You could see that some of the changes in the plastic partially impair the view of the embedded animals. And additionally, the question arises whether the changes are progressing and whether they endanger the stability of the object. The aim of the project is therefore generally to find out what the causes of these phenomena are in order to then be able to draw up a conservation concept and to work out the possibilities and limits of restoration. Since no one from the museum had dealt with the objects before and they had not been inventoried at all, the first step was to photograph the objects from all sides and record all existing information, which unfortunately was not much, as well as the condition of the objects in an Excel. In doing so, the first difficulty already emerged, as I was unsure how to name many of the phenomena that occurred in the plastic. Of course, you can paraphrase what you see, but for a clear table where I just check yes or no, I need precise terms. And once again, there are 89 objects. For example, I would have described the changes shown here as haziness, but it looks different in each of these specimens, so I cannot simply name these different phenomena with the same word. Similar problem with cracks, which appear in different shapes, sizes, and arrangements, and can even be barely or very clearly perceived depending on the viewing angle, what you can see in the two pictures below. Here on the left, you can see the object from the front and no cracks are visible or very hardly visible. And if you change the viewing angle, a network of many fine cracks becomes visible, which appears silvery white due to the reflection of light. In contrast to that, in the upper right image, the cracks can also be seen from the front as white lines. So I asked myself whether there are more differentiated terms of these different forms of cracks. Another example of the difficulties in describing the condition are these white formations that I've already shown. Here I don't even know how to call the phenomenon because I don't even know what it is and I've never seen it before. One thing that is noticeable is that it occurs mainly with the objects that have such a blue coating on the back. The problem is that plastics are still a fairly young discipline in conservation, which is why there is still no established terminology to describe for describing damage to plastic objects. However, there are, of course, few things that you can use to help. I can examine the objects more closely. Of course, I first have to know what kind of plastic it is, since the various plastics differ greatly in their properties and aging behavior. I can look at the phenomena in the plastic microscopically in order to be able to make more detailed statements about the damage. It is also important to understand the method, the manufacturing technique, in order to be able to distinguish whether a phenomenon is a manufacturing defect or actually a change that occurred later. For this purpose, I can try out the method myself as well as use literature from the field of taxidermy. Once I have identified the material, I can use plastics technology literature to research the properties and behavior of that particular plastic. However, when it comes to the preservation of cultural property, problems come up that the industry does not deal with. So I look for case studies in conservation. For example, are there diploma theses that deal with objects made of PMMA? What kind of damage has occurred there? How is it described? And what is its cause? Furthermore, one can look at which terms can be adopted from the terminology for describing damage to cultural property in general, which can be found in this DIN. And there are already research projects that have dealt or are dealing with this topic. At this point, I would like to refer to the project Plastics, a modern material in its cultural historical context, which is currently running at our institute in Cologne in cooperation with the Institute for Plastics Technology in Stuttgart and the Industrial Museum in Oberhausen. One focus of this research project is the development of a terminology for damage to plastics objects, which will later be accessible in the database. And I'm very lucky to be involved in this project as a research assistant, which is, of course, a great help for my project. Now I would like to give an example how these different tools can be used and combined in practice. As I mentioned earlier, the majority of the inclusion specimens were made of PMMA. In literature research, the literature research has shown that this plastic generally tends to form stress cracks. Intermolecular stresses are usually already present in the material as a result of the manufacturing process. And through contact with certain solvents, these can be intensified and lead to cracks. Even contact with solvent vapors is sufficient to damage the material. You can see two examples of cracks in PMMA in this excerpt from the Pop Art Damage Atlas, which was created in a past research project on plastics. If these cracks are fine hairline cracks, like in this picture, they are referred to as crazing, and you can also see that these can lead to a loss of transparency. The Damage Atlas provides a good overview of frequently occurring damage to plastics in general, but for PMMA in particular, however, it remains with these examples. And as I showed at the beginning, there are many phenomena on the inclusion specimens that look very different than this. So yeah, like also these white formations in the embedding material. Of course, in my research, I found much more about damage to PMMA than the pictures just shown, but for this, I still have not found a comparable phenomenon in the literature. So if you now look at the formations under the microscope, you can see that they are in fact very densely packed fine cracks. In the photo, this can probably be seen most clearly in the light reflection in the areas where the cracks are less dense, like here or here. And as we already know, fine cracks can lead to a loss of transparency. So since the cracks are very close together here, it makes sense that these areas appear white due to light refraction. But where do these cracks come from, and why do they form these specific shapes? I had mentioned that the phenomenon occurs especially on objects that carry such a colored coating on the back. So I examined the material more closely. Here you can see the back of the object with the coating, and in the magnification it is visible at a small loss here that it's a thin film with a color application. FTIR analysis by our natural scientists revealed that it is a cellulose acetate film that was attached to the object with polyvinyl acetate as an adhesive. And both materials are leaching or can leach acetic acid over time, which may be the cause of the cracking. And only recently, an article was published about typical damage to PMMA, which occurred due to bonding. The article was published this year in the Journal of Cultural Heritage, and there, among other things, a very similar damage pattern is shown, which you can see in these 4 pictures, which is associated with bonding. Although they detected the damage to joint PMMA parts here, the cause of the damage lies in the adhesive used or the method. They tested various adhesives to reproduce this bonding defect, including glacial acetic acid as the solvent. And this can be related to the assumption that the cracks in the inclusion specimen were caused by acetic acid from the coating materials. In the article, the phenomenon is described as microcrasis with a cloud-like pattern. However, it also says that the morphology and exact causes of this apparently common damage have not yet been examined in detail. So I'm afraid that in this case, I have to accept the fact that there is no specific name for far. So that was one of many examples with which I could hopefully give a little insight into the problem and possible approaches. And finally, I would like to point out once again that although there are various tools for describing things, the most elementary tool is language itself, of course. And I'm sure everyone knows the difficulty of describing objects and their condition as precisely as possible and with the right technical vocabulary. Our terminology is constantly growing when we deal with a certain group of objects for the first time, and with plastics, we're dealing with a new material, so to speak. As we heard in one of the last sessions, collaborations with other disciplines are very important in conservation, so interdisciplinary terminology should be established. And to avoid everyone having their own language, we need to connect. And that is why I shared this project with you today. Many thanks for your attention.
Yeah, thank you for your inspiring talk, Franziska. That was great. There will be time for questions at the very end of our session after the now following 2 poster pictures. And first is Hannah Schürmann. She is also a student of the CICS in Cologne, and she will continue to amaze us with small animals and modern materials. Hannah, off you go. Hannah, will you have to unmute your microphone?
Can you hear me now?
Now we can hear you.
Okay. Sorry. It's a bit complicated. Okay, and I think you can see me now.
We can see you, we can hear you, we can see your poster. Everything's fine.
Okay.
You can just start.
Then okay, I will quickly try to share my screen. One moment, please. It doesn't work on the first try. Okay. You should be able to see my poster now in full mode. Okay. I would like to give you a general overview of my master project and present one of the main problems. The problem can be summarized well with the question how to preserve rubber objects and can be visualized and explained with the help of my project objects, which are 3 aged figures made of unvulcanized natural rubber. To do this, I will first introduce my objects to you a little more closely. They are 3 animal figures, 2 crocodiles and 1 armadillo, from the collection of the Weltkulturenmuseum in Frankfurt am Main. They are dated to the 19th century, come from Guyana in South America, and are to be seen in an ethnographic context. You can see one of the crocodiles in figure 1 and the armadillo in figure 3. They were made from rubber, a natural occurring polymer extracted from the milky sap of the rubber tree and designed using a traditional indigenous technique, which is explained in the second paragraph and in figure 2. The main problem in the conservation and restoration of the figures is the advanced aging of the material, mainly caused by oxidation. The aging has led to various changes and damages. I will first explain the aging process of natural rubber and its effects in more detail, and then present possibilities for oxygen-free storage and display. Natural rubber is made of polyisoprene, an unsaturated hydrocarbon. Free radicals, which are formed, for example, by UV radiation, react with oxygen and form chemical compounds that destroy the unsaturated carbon double bonds. This leads first to chain breaks and then to cross-linking in the rubber molecule. These processes cause changes in the material that can lead to damage. These include hardening of the material, deformations, brittleness, fractures and losses, color changes, and more. In figure 4, you can see the deformed head of one of the crocodiles. Figure 5 shows a sketch of the armadillo figure with ears in an old inventory card. And in figure 6, you can see where these ears broke off at some point and are sadly not preserved. In figure 7, you can see the less oxidized and therefore less darkened area showing in a break line. And the last figure shows an X-ray image where previous editions appear white. To prevent these phenomena, objects made of rubber should be stored and displayed in an oxygen-free atmosphere. For depot storage, the figures are sealed in a bag made of aluminium compound film and transparent Escalneo film. The films are impermeable to oxygen. Inside, in addition to the objects, there are oxygen absorbers and indicators that ensure an oxygen concentration of less than 0.1%. You can modify the bag on one side with an airtight clip bar and make it reusable. The photo to the right shows how the figures were sent to me by the museum. Airtight display cases that you can either equip with oxygen absorbers as well or fill with inert gases such as nitrogen are suitable for the oxygen-free exhibition. The gas exchange can take place control instances such as measuring devices for the oxygen concentration, but also for the relative humidity. I hope I have been able to give you a brief overview of the problem associated with the preservation of rubber objects. I could not go into much detail on the poster, but if you have any further questions or comments, please let me know in the question and answer session, or you can contact me on the address below. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for this excellent pitch, Hannah. Very interesting objects. And next we have master student Lucas Mantel from the University of Amsterdam. And Lucas is about to present his observations in relation to the conservation of modern and contemporary wooden art. Lucas, please go ahead.
Thank you, Angelica. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for sticking around until the end. My name is Lucas Mantel, and as Angelica already said, I am currently a wooden furniture trainee conservator at the UvA. I don't have a lot of time for a lot of large introductions, so I'll just start away. For my master thesis and accompanying research article, I've been exploring the difficulties in the conservation and restoration of modern and contemporary wooden artworks. In this presentation, I will shortly touch upon several of these difficulties I've encountered in my research. Modern and contemporary wooden art, such as this deer by Ossip Zadkine, is a relatively unexplored object type within the field of wooden furniture conservation. And even though there are many modern wooden artworks present in collections, both in the Netherlands and abroad, literature on the degradation and risk posed by these objects is scarce, to say the least. I was asking myself, are these risks not present, or are they too similar to already researched subjects? Or, and that's another possibility, are the risks not recognized? I don't have an answer to these questions, but, and this is obviously hypothetical, more and more wooden artworks will be made and eventually find their way in studios of conservators and restorers like us. So what are the difficulties posed by these objects? Firstly, modern wooden artworks can be made, or are partially made, of newly developed wood-based products. Roughly since the 1950s, there has been a significant increase in the development of different wood-based products, such as panel types like fiberboard, flakeboard, chipboard, waferboard, and so on. Also, for instance, the adhesives used to make these products have strongly been diversified and used. On top of that, artists have combined these objects with a myriad of non-wooden products, so the range of materials restorers will find before them will, again hypothetically, increase. Artists and their makers continuously develop and refine diverse woodworking techniques and production methods in order to make their artworks. On the one hand, there are artists that use traditional furniture making techniques, such as Richard Deacon in the image here, or Martin Purrier, and as we encounter them in antique furniture. But on the other hand, there are artists that use completely new and unorthodox methods to create their artworks. For instance, Maarten Baas. A list of artists working with wood is added to this presentation. Since understanding the production of an object is often vital to the decision-making process, wooden furniture conservators might need to prepare for objects that don't necessarily follow the, so to speak, rules of traditional furniture making. Information on, for instance, the production process might only be known to the artist or maker, and extracting this information requires skill, such as interviewing an artist, that might not always be common practice in wooden furniture conservation. Additionally, some information might still be protected by copyrights, patents, or private ownerships. Then there is the facet of the so-called meaning or identity of an artwork. This is a very difficult subject, and it can play a significant role in the decision-making process. It plays around questions such as, what are the determining factors contributing to the identity of an artwork? Or, what is the role of the context in which the artworks function? The meaning or identity of an artwork can be layered and requires subjective interpretation. Modern art, just like, for instance, ornaments, is like a language, and understanding these languages and its complexities is crucial for understanding the impact that conservation treatment has on the identity of an artwork. Conservator restorers have to be aware of their impact. Even assessing the condition of an artwork is not a neutral process. Furthermore, the conservator has to manage the influence of different stakeholders, such as the artist or owner, who might have conflicting perspectives on the meanings of an artwork. So to put everything in a nutshell, restoring modern and contemporary artworks require distinct resources, methods, and skills in order to navigate the difficulties posed by these objects. All right, I want to thank you for this very brief insight in the conservation and restoration of modern wooden art. If you have any questions or remarks, please ask so in the bar on the side. I also have the references here, the promised list of artists, which is also on the poster. And I want to thank you very much for listening on this late evening. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your research with us, Lucas. We have now a short Q&A session. Again, there are quite a few questions in the chat box. May I ask our speakers to turn on their microphones only when we address the question to you? Okay, let's start. The first question, to kick off the Q&A session, I have a question myself. Sorry, my microphone didn't unmute. I'm sorry. To kick off the Q&A session, I have a question to Welmoed. Okay, Welmoed is there. Very good. In many museum storage areas, wood preservatives were used to protect the objects. Were the ones you examined also exposed to this present-day problem?
Sorry, can you?
I can repeat. In many museum storages, wood preservatives were used to protect the objects. Were the ones you examined also exposed to this present-day problem?
Oh, I don't know that. Interesting question, because they can be dangerous, of course. Yeah.
Yes, I think so too. Yeah, but okay.
Yeah.
Then you.
No one mentioned that.
Okay, and it wasn't examined too. Never.
No.
Okay.
No, not that I know of. No.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Then there's a question from Laura Bode. Dear Welmoed, thank you for the interesting presentation. Did you find any markings or hints on the proper composition on the back of the panels from the initial installation or the removal from the room?
That's also interesting. No, we didn't find any signs. Oh yeah, we did find signs. Some numbers were added on some of the door frames. And what was interesting was that we saw markings for making the ceiling, so higher up, but not for the paneling that much. And we managed to see which part went where by comparing the components to the photographs, which were of excellent quality. So every tiny damage on the photograph we could find on the real object. So that's how we found out which element went where, but not many markings now.
Okay. Thank you, Welmoed. I will now hand over to Angelika.
Yes, I have questions for Franziska.
Sorry, I have questions for Franziska. I hope you can hear me now. And the first one is from Vincent. Did you observe degradation phenomena unique to wet specimens like embryos or any soft tissue specimens and dry specimens like insects and skeletons?
Not directly, but the animals need different preparation before the embedding, depending on the animal and what you want to show. For example, the specimen I showed where the liquid was leaking from, this liquid I've just found on the specimens, which show a red embryo, where they highlighted the skeleton with the color, and I'm not familiar with the technique so far, but maybe the method which they the method they used is maybe related to the damage, but I'm not sure about that. And another thing is with insects, but this is maybe more manufacturing damage, that they often appear silver on the surface because they have chitin in their in them, and that it can bond with the plastic.
Yeah, thank you very much. Perhaps one more question for you. I was wondering, did you think about developing treatment aims for this particular collection? And if that was done, how important would be the recreation of the educational function? Is something like that possible at all?
Yes, I will make a conservation concept, but I think it will stay with conservation and no restoration. But I'm not at this point so far because I'm still recording the damages, and I know it's not planned that the function as a teaching material will because sorry, I have to think about that. It's so late. I'm so tired.
Yeah, sorry. It's no problem at all. Perhaps you can come back to this question at a later stage.
Later,
I know it's a bit hypothetical. So don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. I think we also have some question for Hannah. Jörg?
Yeah, I'm there. Yes, and the question comes from Vincent. Hannah, can you please unmute your microphone?
Yes, I did.
Okay, very good. You showed us a great method for conserving and storing these objects for the next generations. However, the downside that the object won't be visible to the public. What do you propose to overcome this issue?
Well, it is still visible for the public. I think you have to, when you put it in an oxygen-free case, you can still show it to the public, and yeah, it is not that tangible. I think that was the word you used, but I think it's better to try to preserve the object because the degradation can lead also to the loss of the complete object when it becomes so hardened and brittle that it's just crumbs left, and then you have no object at all. So I think it's not the best option because you cannot have such a personal not conversation, not a personal connection to it, but
Okay.
it's better than to lose the object completely, I would say.
Okay. Very, very, very good. I think we have some questions now for Lucas, and Angelika takes over.
Yeah, thank you very much. And there are many more questions, but we are very aware of the time, and we can email all those questions to you and discuss them at a later stage. So, Lucas, I was wondering, were they or are there any kind of interviews with the artists conducted about the materials and techniques? Will there be some kind of database be set up to kind of collect all the information we need for the future and for future restorations?
Thank you for the question, Angelika. There is actually a database, and I think there are several. I think there's a German one, and I think there's a Dutch one as well, and maybe also an English one. There is also a very good publication on the artist interview. I think Sonic the Stichter wrote part of it, which is also available, I think also online. And I can wholeheartedly recommend reading it. Because it is, in fact, a big part of the interview to ask about the materials used. I myself interviewed the son of an artist about the materials used in a wooden piece, and it was very helpful for determining what the glue could have been that the artist has used in his artwork.
Yeah, I think that's great that those databases already exist or are in the making. And I know that sometimes modern art, it's kind of practice that artists are informed or inform themselves about kind of the properties of materials available to them, and that might also help in kind of coming up with techniques and materials that improve the longevity of objects. The question is that always wanted by the artist? You know, I think some of them kind of work with this kind of degradation process. That's more a statement than a question, but sorry.
Yes, there is a part of modern art that is autodestructive. There are probably artists who want their objects to degrade naturally, but there are also artists that think with the conservative restore when the opportunity is there. So it's a whole spectrum.
It is, yeah. It is, yeah. Yeah, I think we could go on and on discussing all these wonderful topics, but yeah, we have completely run out of time. And I thank you very much for kind of bearing with us. Thank you again, Welmoed, Franziska, Hannah, and Lucas for sharing your findings with us. And this brings us to the end of the fourth ConNext session. I try to connect my video for the last sentences. Yeah, and again, I would like to thank our keynote speaker, Tim Bechthold, and a big thank you for all the speakers of today, Sofie Dierickx, Tabea Vietzke, Sterre Van der Weerd, Welmoed, Kreb, Franziska Timmermann, Hannah Schürmann, and Lukas Mantel. And We would like to thank our institutes and partners, and last but not least, you, the audience, for being so patient and for making this event happen and staying till the end. And our next and final session is on musical instruments with keynote speaker Friedemann Hellwig, the former professor for wood conservation at the CICS in Cologne, and now still working as a conservator for musical instruments in Hamburg in Germany. And this last session will be hosted by Friederike Wentig and Andreas Krupa. And now it's time for Jörg and myself to say goodbye and have a good night. Bye.
Goodbye.